some other people will join in the next few steps. So, Tom and Benji, I guess like one of the things I sort of wanted to talk about a little with this is sort of because it's probably something will apply to both of you in a pretty strong way. Is this whole concept of recording ourselves is now a huge thing. It was interesting. I was working with a string quartet today, and I was trying to explain to them what I've been doing the last 3 years. And when they were talking to me, I sort of got the sense that they were sort of feeling like, well, he's always been doing this remote recording thing. And the thing is, starting about a year before the pandemic, because I was on tour, I was doing things like that. But now this whole idea that people are going to send you a track and have you develop it is really codified into something that's really going to be something that we all have to kind of handle in a very cohesive way. So while I'm going to be talking about arrangement, what I'm really talking about in a lot of ways is like the scenario where any entity, songwriter, DJ, filmmaker, cool. Hi, Courtney. Hi, Bailing.
Hi.
Nice to see you
Hi,
all.
Dave.
Hello, hello. We're just kind of getting started. So what we were just kind of talking about, in a second, I kind of want to go around the room for a second and sort of see what your individual goals for this kind of work are for yourself, so I can get a better sense of how I can help you. But what I'm kind of looking at is not so much like the art of writing down arrangements. That's a little bit a thing of the past in a lot of ways. It's really just the scenario that all of us are facing now as. So yeah, I kind of want to look a little bit at this whole new climate of recording ourselves and kind of doing, I mean, we can call it arrangement, we can call it like supportive production, we can call it co-production, but really the question remains like, how do we handle the situation when an artist, a DJ, a filmmaker, a choreographer, an advertising company is literally just coming to us and asking us to turn around something, to create content, to revise content, to develop content? And over the last 3 years, my work has become very, very heavily involved in this. I was doing it quite a bit before the pandemic because I was on a very long tour with Evanescence and Lindsey Sterling, where I was worried about my session career kind of dissipating. And so I started already having quite a few remote clients at that time. The thing that I kind of want to look at a little bit today is some of the specifics around like how to do this, how to do it effectively, and like what place it can have in your career. So the first thing I'm going to sort of go around the room with a question is to sort of ask like, how much recording in this remote style have you been doing, and how has it been working out for you? And in terms of this session and the next couple of weeks, what are some of the things that would be interesting for you to sort of dig into? I'm going to start with Benji.
Hey. Um, so yeah, I mean, I do quite a bit of it. I like right when I got out of my undergrad, like I was mostly like working as a music director for like hip hop artists and R&B artists. And then I realized that a lot of the bass players who were playing in those bands were also like co-producing a lot of these records and stuff. So I got into production and stuff like that and tried to get my chops in that department going. And then I also started like making beats and stuff like that with my bass lines and whatnot. So I, in terms of what I see myself doing and where I want to grow with this, like I guess I want to, I have a lot of experience just laying down bass lines. I want to grow on the full production side of it and kind of like create the full track. And whether it's straight up like like writing the tracks for people if they just send me melody, or like coming up with like a full groove concept or whatever, like um just kind of instead of just laying down bass lines, which I've done quite a bit of, just like doing even more than that, almost like full on production stuff in these situations. So yeah.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Where are some places that you feel like you've seen this approach succeed, and where are some areas that you really feel that you need room for growth in this remote work that you've been doing, remote production, let's say?
So I guess areas I've succeeded is just like laying down bass lines for people and like being able to do that really quickly and efficiently and understanding what people want in that department, and then also being able to just kind of add little flares and little solo stuff or effects when needed and stuff. where I feel like I've not like my full on like beats and stuff like that have not been as successful, and like my full on like sending like having like a rapper just like go on this track has not been
Right.
as successful as like me just laying down on people's stuff. So
Got it. Awesome. Thank you, Benji. Courtney, what have you been doing in this area thus far?
Sorry. I've done a few recording things at home. I'm kind of going to be doing more of it with Chavi in this like next coming month. But I've had more experience with people asking me to like physically write out string arrangements for them and stuff. I've been doing a little bit of that. So um, yeah, I have probably less experience actually recording at home and everything.
That's great. When you're writing out these arrangements, has that been more for records, or that's been more for live situations or covers sort of situations, or what have that has that been for predominantly?
It was for live situations.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. Shavi, I know you and I've worked together on this, so that's a good thing. But tell us a little bit about what your experience has been, either as arranging or even working on your own record in a kind of a extended remote capacity as well as in studios.
Yeah. Yeah, so for me, I mean, before I met you, I was doing this sometimes. Like I did some recordings also at the studios, not at home that much. I did at home because I liked all this recording stuff at home and everything. But after I met you and I started doing it, I realized I like this a lot. So I started doing it much more and doing Instagram ads and connections and things. And now I'm doing it like quite a lot. I'm doing like 8 to 10 recordings per month, and I discovering like I like it a lot. And each time I come up with more ways of doing it, but still many doubts. The more I do it, the more doubts I have. But it's something I like and that I want to do more. Now I will start doing also with Courtney some things together so we can do more. And yeah, but I love it.
Awesome. I love that. Tom, I know we've talked about it a little bit. Tom, are you making an atonal 16 voice fugue at your studio right now?
No fugues.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, the only remote recording stuff has been like the stuff that I've sent to you for lessons. The it's been less of let's learn how to remote record and let's send something to Dave for a lesson has been the vibe. Especially considering just the setup and location of my apartment is just like there's too much noise happening everywhere for me to like.
right.
I don't want to say care, but care at this point in my life.
I got you. I got you. All right. Let's go down to the classroom down here. Nacho, what's up? Nice to see you. Haven't seen you since Pittsburgh. What's going on?
Hi, nice to see you too. So my recording experience is really small. I've recorded for ensembles. I've recorded with the string quartet, mostly with sci-fi, and all the arrangement and recording that I've done and where I have been learning is been sci-fi related. So writing for us, making all the covers of the video game or the movie music, and also recording with the string quartet. So yeah, I mean, I would like to learn more about how to build different textures with the string quartet, how to build like more interesting lines in the string quartet.
Hey, man, what's up? Nice to see you. Ben, what's up, Ben? Ben just made an amazing record, which I think is great, but he didn't make it remotely. So
Um, so in terms of recording remotely, I only started doing that during COVID when that all started. And I only had a handful, but it did keep me fairly busy for like a year or two. And that was mostly other people just sending me their projects and wanting, sometimes there'd be a written part that I would record, other times it would be just come up with like a, improvised line or something. And I did that. I haven't really done it at all for at least a year, probably 2 years. So I would definitely like to build up. Well, one, I don't have a good setup. I don't really have a good recording mic. You know, right now I use my DPA clip-on and I run it through like a Zoom as an interface. I did just get a Scarlett, so at least have an interface now.
Right.
But you know, a good mic, a good setup, and just like having the connections or the knowing people to reach out to collaborate on projects like that, just to have more work in that field. Because like Shaka said, it's nice. It's really cool to be able to, you know, record from home, and it's really fun to get a project and, you know, use your ears and creativity to figure out a cool part. That said, from the arranging, from the writing side of things, I mostly just write, like from a jazz context, just like lead sheets, you know, tunes. I haven't, in my undergrad, I studied some arranging. But again, that was like very like big band heavy, which isn't really my bag. So I think kind of similar to Nacho, it'd be nice to explore some string quartet writing, like really know how to do that in a, you know.
Right.
in a good-
Lawrence.
Hello.
Oh,
So most of my recording experience has been live. I only record at home few things, more for sci-fi stuff. I'm starting to have friends interest on recording things because I recently bought the H90 pedal effect, and they are more into like including atmospheres and kind of like different stuff, no more like straight like licks or melodies for the YouTubes, like more for soundtracks. So I would love to also kind of like know what is a good setup, how to also make those atmospheres interest, how
right.
to not be repetitive and that stuff.
Right. I mean, just to jump, in for 1 sec, and I'll continue that, but I want to kind of get to the heart of the matter. So, you know, I never really set out to be an arranger. It really wasn't my goal. I really didn't do anything until I was 20, but compete as like a classical cello soloist and play jazz. And then what started happening right at the beginning of my career, when I was getting my master's at Juilliard, I took an internship job at Murder Inc. Records, which was a hip hop label that had artists like Ashanti and Ja Rule. And I was just always making these cello collages. Either I'd make them myself on a computer, or I'd just hang out with friends and I'd kind of make them. And so it started catching on. I had a sort of a writing team in New York that I was writing with. And, you know, it was sort of our little edge that we could put like, you know, 25, 30 cello tracks on something, and it would give us a way that our tracks sort of had an edge on other people. They sounded more organic. And I never really saw it as like arranging. I just kind of saw it more as like a cool way I could use the cello. And I really liked the way that it sort of fused my love of jazz piano with like my love of the cello as a vocal instrument. What happened for me was that pretty quickly people realized that that would save a lot of money, obviously, especially in hip hop, where they're like, oh, wow, we can hire like 8 people who don't improvise in a studio, or we can hire this guy and pay him $100 or not pay him anything, and he'll do this because he's 22 and has no idea what he's doing. So in the beginning, I did an awful lot of work for free, but what I did do was I spent a lot of time with producers who were a lot better than me. So I was watching very carefully, like the way that strings were used in songs. And somewhere around 2004, when I was on tour with Evanescence, and I was still really young at this, I landed the job doing Breaking Benjamin's big record. And I don't even sort of understand how it happened, but the song Diary of Jane blew up. And the big thing that is important in the pop music industry is, much like acting, the pop music industry maneuvers in terms of previous successes you've had. Like, for example, Chavi and myself are on this Louis Capaldi song that has been #1 for a while. And also the string version that he and I did was #3 in the UK. So now our portfolio has that song, and that opens a lot of doors, whether our work is good or not. I mean, I think our work is really good on it. I think we both played very well on that song. But the fact is that the people hiring us are usually the people at Warner Records that are okaying a budget for strings are not musicians. They're development people in an office, and they want to see a portfolio of hit songs, and they want to see names that they recognize. So I started with the Diary of Jane thing, and it started opening doors. And right away, I was doing quite a lot of arranging. And then the thing that really kind of made the whole thing big for me was Coldplay. And the Coldplay story is pretty funny. I might have told some of you this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway, just because it's kind of hilarious how it happened. If that's okay with you guys, I just think it's funny. So I had done this acoustic show with John Bon Jovi that was a kind of a disaster. And we did this string quartet version of Living on a Prayer, and it didn't go very well. And so we had to re-record all of our tracks, and we went to John Bon Jovi's house. And there was this guy named Martin, who not is Chris Martin, but just a guy named Martin, who's the engineer, who I've lost touch with now. But I'm always nice to everybody because it's really important. First of all, you should be nice to everybody. Second of all, you really don't know who's going to be your connection on a gig. You have no idea. So everybody was a little haughty with this guy, and I was just kind of broing out with him. I was like, hey, Martin, you're cool, whatever. I want to sit and talk with you because I'm really uncomfortable talking to John Bon Jovi because it's John Bon Jovi. So about a week later, he calls me up and he says, I've got this kind of gig for you. And I was like, okay, kind of gig, interesting. What is it? And he goes, I can't really tell you what it is. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, when is it? He's like, it's on the 4th of July. And I was like, well, I was supposed to go to this party with my girlfriend. I can't go. He's like, no, it's probably worth your while. I was like, does it pay? He's like, well, if you win it, it does. And I was like, well, but how long is it? He's like, well, it could be like a couple hours or the whole week. And I was like, okay, this is like a fiasco. But finally I said yes. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this 4th of July gig. My girlfriend was really mad. Maybe she left me. I can't remember. Something bad happened. It doesn't matter. But in any case, I ended up going to the Magic Shop studio, which is in the East Village. And I knocked on the door. It was around noon. And this guy opens the door and he's got a British accent. His name is Chris. And he's like, hello, I'm Chris. I'm like, and he looks really familiar. And I'm like, okay, Chris, this is cool. And for some reason, I think he's like a drummer in a Williamsburg band. I was living in Williamsburg, tragically hip at the time and like trying to be all cool. And so I'm like, all right, Chris, like you're cool. Let's hang out, whatever. So we played like video games for a while because there was no engineer there. And we sat there and played video games for like an hour and a half. And like, I was like, this is crazy. What are we doing? So finally he's like, all right, mate, I'm going to like play you another song from the record because I want you to hear what my record's like. So we go in and we listen to this song from that record that was finished. It wasn't Viva La Vida. It was a finished song. And all that's going through my mind the entire time is like, I can't believe that I pissed off my girlfriend to go record with this band that sounds exactly like Coldplay. This is like what's going through my head. I was like, what? I can't believe I did this. What a waste of my energy. This is terrible. So then I kind of, somehow I've decided he's a drummer in my head. So I say to him, I'm like, oh, cool. This is great. Like, what's your role in the band? You're the drummer, right? He's like, no, it's my band. And I'm like, what's the name of your band? He's like, Coldplay. And I was like, oh. So he loved me. He thought that was hilarious that I had no idea who he was. So just to give you an idea of Vita La Vida, we spent 3 days together. At this time, his idea for Vita La Vida was a 7-minute orchestral outro for the record. It was not going to have vocals. It was not going to be a song. He wanted to make something like Bittersweet Symphony, but that was this outro for the record. And so we put, are you ready for this? 180 tracks of, it was me and a violinist named Davide Rossi, and we made 180 tracks of strings with no copy and paste for 7 minutes of these parts. And the bass line, he literally spent like 4 or 5 hours trying literally every mathematical permutation of those 4 notes. It was exhausting. But we got there, and it's interesting. And I'm bringing this up because of 2 reasons. One is that obviously being a part of that that record changed my professional life a lot, which is one of the reasons that y'all have to really chase becoming attached to a couple of pop songs that are hits. It's very hard to maneuver in that world without having a calling card. And the other thing is just to show you that that's an orchestration that everybody thought was written down that was never written down at all. Not one note of writing happened at Vita La Vida. So what arrangement is just creativity. And it has an awful lot to do with like resonance and range and EQ more than it has to do with harmony and music paper. When somebody sends me a track to arrange strings on, the things I think about the most are first basically like, what was the moment that someone decided strings were a good idea? I think this is because a lot of times I don't think strings are a good idea when I'm producing records. And in fact, I absolutely hate symphonic rock. And when I started the project with Foreigner, where I've made their orchestral record, that's one of the first things I said to Mick Jones from Foreigner. I was like, I think Metallica with a symphony sucks. I hate it. And the only symphony thing I like is the Scorpions with the Berlin Philharmonic. That's like the only one I've ever seen that I thought was rad. And Mick Jones was like, I kind of hate it too, but we have to do it. You're perfect for me. We can hate it together. And I was like, cool, man, let's do it. You know, so I kind of when I add strings to things, I think first, like, what is the moment where the artist turned to the co-writer or the producer and thought that adding strings would be an interesting touch? What exactly are they looking for? Are they looking for heightened emotion? Are they just looking to make it sound more expensive? Because that happens a lot with artists like Josh Groban or producers. Honestly, it was a bit the Louis Capaldi thing in a way where like those guys are amazing top line writers, but they don't play any instruments. So really part of what you and I did, Chavi, on Louis Capaldi was merely make the tracks sound more emotional and a lot more expensive, because also they're justifying their budgets and stuff like that. Is it something where the strings are putting you in a location? Like it's really like the BB Rexa. I have a BB Rexa 2 songs coming out Friday. In her case, she wanted us transported to the 1970s. Answering those questions is really important to understand the specificity of what you're adding. Combined with this, you have to put a lot of time, in a sense, into studying the history of how strings are used on records. I think the funny thing that I see in a lot of string players is that they think they're going to show up at a session and sound amazing, having not put any time into Motown or Hall & Oates or disco or Charlie Parker with strings or everything Frank Sinatra did, to actually sit there and kind of analyze and practice and do little mock experiments, which is a great thing to do, of just write 15 intros in a Frank Sinatra style, like things like that. Those are the kinds of things that I have to turn around really, really fast. So it's a bit of the playing being really shiny and really well recorded, and also an ability to kind of understand sort of the history of how the instrument's been used. It becomes really important these days because all of you guys are walking out into a world where no one's going to give you a composer or arranger, and none of you need them. Come on. Every single person in this Zoom is a composer. Every single person I've dealt with on who's here right now is a composer. You do not need anyone to write you parts. I'm working on 3 film scores right now that I'm orchestrating. One, the composer is Questlove, doesn't read music, isn't going to write parts. One is a huge Disney movie. The composer is the guy that wrote Louis Capaldi's song, doesn't read music, doesn't write parts. The third one is the composer is an improvisational pianist, doesn't read music, doesn't write parts. Not going to get any parts anymore. You have to figure it out. You're the string specialist. It's on you. So the more expertise you find, the more of a competitive edge that you have. And every single one of you is completely and utterly capable of doing this. Also, Lourdes, to your point about gear, I have like a studio I built in my house, and then I also run 2 other studios because I never thought, I'm being really honest right now, when the world shut down and all my touring was canceled, I never thought that like 3 years later, I would be like slammed with like a ton of remote recording work. I actually was like taking programming online and thinking about other careers that were going to have to happen while the world was closed. So, you know, Instagram was a huge source of work for me. And actually, when the world closed down, right a couple weeks after March of 2020, the film composer Howard Shore reached out to me to help him finish a film called Pieces of a Woman that stars Shia LaBeouf. And I did it all with, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Source Connect or Audio Movers. Is everybody using that technology? So Source Connect and Audio Movers are a technology where you guys can be in a studio where you are and I can be where I am, and we're hearing the same exact mix. So effectively, you can direct the session hearing the same thing. So Howard was on Zoom talking to me, and he was on the Source Connect technology. And so we did the whole film score together, and then he gave my name to a lot of people. And so I got very busy. So I really had to brush up my orchestration chops a lot. And some of that was the historical study, like I'm telling you about, really breaking apart. And I'm talking like I would listen for hours. Like I would, in the car, I would like really play Charlie Parker with strings till I like had basically figured out every single thing that was going on, like in every moment. and tone, voicing, also how it interacts with the other elements that are there. In that case, the saxophone, like how do you stay out of its way EQ wise? So it's been very, very exciting, and it's been very humbling, and I've ended up working with so many of my heroes the last 3 years that it's pretty crazy. And I kind of love it. But Lourdes, to your point about gear, I just wanted to say the main things you need are just like an interface, some facility in Logic or Pro Tools or Ableton. And then you do need to spend money on some kind of mic. I mean, it can even just be a 414. It's like fine. Mainly what you're doing that matters the most is in a lot of ways like how you deliver the files to people. The miking piece is not, it's not, look, right now I'm doing remote recording here in Holland in some fancy concert hall that literally is a reverb plugin, and that's nice. But I mean, I did a lot of Frank Ocean stuff in Chuck's like 1-bedroom apartment in Williamsburg with a 414. Like it's really about the ears and the clarity and just the engineering. And I would say that I think that that really is important. And then delivering them. It's very important that when you record for people, you not only send them the files, but that you stem everything now and label it very clearly. There's almost nothing like Javi, the Pointless song is basically Chuck's string stem. They never opened the multi-tracks of that ever. They just used what I sent them. So a lot of producers are thinking like DJs now. It doesn't mean you only give them a mix of the strings, but you should give them like high strings with reverb, high strings without reverb, low strings with reverb, low strings without reverb, tremolo with reverb, tremolo without reverb. Anything that you think could be a question like, oh, here's this contrapuntal line, just put it on another track and give it a very clear name, like Happy Viola Solo. Also, if you're playing solos, don't give people more than 3 and give them characteristic names. When I started getting busier with this whole thing, I met with a friend of mine that runs this is kind of funny, but I met with a friend of mine that runs a food prep company that's sort of like Home Chef. It's a local one where I live. It's not a big one, but I wanted to get her advice because basically a lot of these producers and artists, they want to cook a little bit with your strings. They don't want to cook a lot. They don't want to open 80 tracks. They also don't want you to send them one thing that they have to use. So sending a sort of modular file that looks really clean and clear in Pro Tools, is really easy to use, is kind of something that will get you a lot of traction. Also, it's incredibly important to really talk to the artist when you get the track, especially in this remote climate. Like really talk to them, find out more about like why they wrote the song, like what the song's about, and ask some questions like, what's an example of a song that the strings you love? What's an example of the song that you would be like horrified to have, the strings from Rocket Man on Ben Sutton's record? So maybe, I don't know, like Elton John style strings. But so I want to take a second and see what questions y'all have for me, to kind of guide it more to the space where you guys want, if that's okay. Anyone who has a question, you can unmute yourself, or I'll start asking you guys questions. Let's see. Yes, Javi.
So for me, one of the questions will be, in terms of mixing when you layer strings, that's something I'm sometimes lost. I've been trying like many ways, but I don't know which kind of reverbs work well, which kind of things. I just know that, for example, when I send my strings to Johnny Nice, the way he mixed everything was very cool. I was like, wow, I want to know how to
Yeah,
get
you had the advantage that Johnny worked with me for 15 years, so he was ready for you.
Yeah, that was very cool, but I want to know like how to do that in a way that at least even if people don't use it, I can get as close. I can show when I send to a client the reference, it sounds as good as possible. So
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of orchestral record matching. So even when I'm making it, I make sure that I have a very specific, like let's say I'm doing 30 cello layers. I try to have something very specific in mind. And I'm sorry, this is just me, but I really geek out on this stuff. Like I'll be like, I want this to sound like Vienna Philharmonic's recording of Glazunov Violin Concerto, this particular one from 1967. Like I'll very clearly, both in my playing and especially in the width of my mixing profile, because a lot of it's about the width of how wide the strings sound in terms of like, do you want it to feel like a concert stage? Do you want to feel like you're right in the middle of it? Like what's the sort of, degree of that? I think that it's important that you have a sonic image in mind when you start layering. I think the mixing is a piece of it, but I think having something very clear in your head of what you want the final destination to be as you're layering will help a lot with what you're talking about. Beyond that, I would just say that like the mixture of also distances from the mic with violin is really, really important because phasing happens so much more quickly with violin than it does with cello. So I think like doing more stuff, like once you've done your sort of core tracks, make sure you do like a few with mute, because the mute creates a sawtooth wave that slices through the phasing of the Fourier analysis of the waveforms of the violin. And then also make sure you do a few that are very far away from the mic, because that's what you really are trying to do. The one thing that's hardest with layering is to learn how to create dimensionality, if that makes sense. Beyond that, I mean, I think very geographically about the mixing. I think like, oh, I actually think about an orchestra stage. I think like, maybe I'm going to put all of the cellos between 10 o'clock and noon over here, like a clump. Maybe I want them all over the place back behind the singer. Maybe it's like here, a lot I play with the width piece. The width piece seems to be very important and very magical. Additionally, as you're arranging and as you're mixing, you have to be unbelievably careful about EQ. Like right when I hear a track, I do a tremendous amount of a frequency analysis. I actually think that the frequency analysis is a lot more important than what notes you put in the string part, because if you're kind of seeing where the density, I really thought about this a lot when I worked on like Avenged Sevenfold and Breaking Benjamin and all these, and Evanescence, all these emo records, where there's these big walls of guitar. And kind of like the sweet spot where you really want to put all your strings has already been taken up. And so it's like, it doesn't really help to overload the mids with like more content. So it's like, as you're kind of creating your voicings and as you're mixing, really look for those pockets in the EQ where things are not happening. You know what I mean? And tuck them in. I'd say just from having worked with you that I think the distance from the mic thing is important, because you always have a great clear sound, but sometimes the blend isn't as shiny as it can be. Sorry, but still you're a hero. But I think that blend piece is, and also play different vibratos. Sometimes this is kind of really weird and TMI, but like sometimes when I'm having trouble blending, I'll even sort of imagine like I'm other people. Like I'll be like, I'm Russian guy now, and I'm like, because it's so important that the vibratos kind of don't phase. If you have the same vibrato, the waveforms add and it creates artifacts. So you have to like create other vibratos that actually kind of slice through that. I would say that, and then I would also say that get more information from the artists like right up front about their favorite artists. Like if they're like, I love Lana Del Rey, well, that tells you a lot about how you're going to mix it. Also, don't worry about, it's so important when you first send the ref that the artist has an emotional experience. So don't worry about putting plugins and stuff on the ref. I do it all the time. I constantly am vinylizing refs, constantly, because I know they don't want to hear it that shrill. I'm not going to send the tracks with a vinylizer on them. But like, if they're going for something like this Disney movie I'm doing with Rihanna right now, they really want it to feel like old school. And so I'm vinylizing everything because it will get there eventually, but that way, the very first time she hears stuff, it immediately sounds like that. So, and then the other thing I would say is when you're sending the presentation mix, find that sweet spot where the strings are really doing something without overpowering. Don't just tuck them, like find that sweet spot. Any other questions? Maestro, yes, Jose.
Professor, many times the mastering that we have in the program sound different with sports because this happen.
So what's the question?
Yes, many times the mastering
Right.
that we have in the program, it's different with exported. Understand me?
So you're saying if you actually master a mix yourself internally digitally?
Yes, ¿alguien puede traducirme de lo que están, por favor?
Dale,
Dilo en español, por fin.
Lo que le estoy diciendo es que muchas veces la masterización que uno hace en el programa suena diferente cuando la exportas. No sé si es por la calidad que la exportas o porque el programa a veces
¿en Pro
Yeah.
Tools o en dónde?
en el Ableton Live.
Okay, so he's saying that sometimes when you export a master, it doesn't sound the same as it sounded in the program. So you're hearing your mix, your master in Ableton, you export it, and then you have another sound when it's already done. And he's wondering why this happens and if it's like normal.
Yeah, it's not totally normal. It would have a lot to do with your outputs and like how your outputs are set up. But we could look at that if we hang out at some point for sure. It shouldn't be like that, actually. It should bounce with all the plugins. Is it not bouncing with plugins correctly, or it's just out of balance with the mix?
Lo que ocurre es que los plugins no se exportan correctamente, o es una cuestión de balance, es una cuestión de que no se escucha bien, o sea, la mezcla.
Sí,
Es la mezcla.
sí, sí, sí.
It's more about the balance and the mix,
The mix,
that
yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
match what he's listening.
Yeah, you may be, if you're working in Ableton, you know what, I'll ask a little bit more of my engineer that works in Ableton to kind of see if we can troubleshoot some stuff. But what I would predominantly say is that it may just not be saving certain automation stuff. I mean, there is a natural compression that if you bounce something into an MP3, it is a more compressed file. It sounds more compressed, but there shouldn't be anything about levels that should be different in a bounce. That shouldn't be happening.
Right.
One of the reasons that reference tracks are so important to send is because right when I started doing this kind of work, I would only send the files. And the problem with sending the files is that you have no idea what people's Pro Tools templates look like. So for example, let's say I was sending 15 cellos. They might have imported them into a session where their template blasted cello number 5 while 6, 7, and 8 were completely not audible. And in that moment that the engineer plays that 3 seconds that sounds like chaos for the artist has already decided not to have strings. So the reference tracks become, and the stemming becomes really important because things don't necessarily load in the way that you send them. And I think that's important, you know. Ableton actually imports really well. I will say that, like, I've been using Ableton like a lot lately, and the file delivery piece has been actually pretty spotless. So I do like that a lot, though I'm mostly a Pro Tools guy. Tom, yes, you had a query.
What do you mean by stemming?
So stemming, I just mean that, like, if, for example, you played 5 low cello parts, that you would include like a submix that was really nice of that sort of balanced out. So that let's say there were like, let's say you came up with like 5 cello parts total, and then you know, played 5 times all 5 of them. So now we have like 25 tracks. That kind of thing could be a bit overwhelming for an artist that's more like a hip hop artist. The one thing I really want you guys to take home about this is that many of these people writing songs, they really, really, really are very limited in their musical harmony knowledge. A lot of them are words people, they're hit songwriters. They are very brilliant at sort of capturing the gestalt of what people want to hear. But I've had hit songwriters who don't know what a C major chord is. So if they suddenly have like 25 cello tracks from Tom, that might be overwhelming. So stemming out is basically kind of giving them a simpler tabletop where, like, let's say there's like 25 cello tracks, but 3 of them are the same part. So you submix those into like 3 cello sections. And then maybe there's like a plucked part and you call that plucky cello. So it's kind of giving them like less material, but that's kind of cohesive and easier to use, if that makes sense. And then it's kind of modular. It's not as like big and bulky. some, you know, sort of classic engineers that have been around forever, they want all the tracks. But as I'm saying, a lot of the top line writers, they're really just using the stems that I make. They're not even opening the Dropbox. It has the multi-tracks. So yes.
I'm gonna jump in for 1 second if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm thinking if there could be during one of these sessions, Dave, that you could actually share your screen and show them an actual string session that you've done, and show exactly what is meant by stemming and how to export stems and mixing, and I think that would be a really great opportunity if that's possible.
Yeah, I think it's good. I also think that everyone should have to do a song for next week. So I'm gonna email that. When I send y'all the song to work on, I'm also gonna send instructions. And then do your best, like do what you can do. I'm not saying don't go out and buy a mic, don't do anything like that. But imagine it came to you and solve it with your instrument the best that you can. You know what I mean? If I know, Benji, if you only have a bass, then you're gonna have to solve it with a bass or make friends with someone, you know, and figure out how to get that solved. I'm literally, I gotta tell you, like, one of the hardest things about my life right now is that I'm having to solve it on the road in all sorts of weird ways. Like I'm in Holland and I'm doing it in a concert hall, which a little bit sucks because I don't want the room reverb. So I've baffled myself. And I'm working with guys that are really, really cool, but they've never done this in their life. So like there's a lot to it. So kind of learning to get whatever. And I'm also playing this lousy cello they lent me and all this kind of stuff. So like learning to work with what you can work with becomes like a really important part of it. So that's going to be something that I'm going to send. I just have to make sure that Javi, that it's not something you already played on. So like, because that'll give you a very unfair advantage. Because one of the things I want to talk to y'all about when we do it is not just what you heard, but sort of once we sort of reveal what I did, kind of like how the whole process happened with the artist, the writer, and the producer. The reason that I feel like this is very important for all of us is that, listen, like classical music and jazz really doesn't pay very well. This kind of work actually is very consistent. A lot of times you do get royalties. Some of those actually can be pretty big if it's a hit song. And that, for me, has allowed me a lot more freedom in the choices I make musically. And so I think it's something that would be great for all of you to kind of enjoy as well. Nacho, did you have a question before?
Yes. So and it was like talking about Ableton. I have faced sometimes the problem that when I import the reference track that they send you to record on top of it, and it says whatever the name of the song is, 120 BPMs. And when I put it in Ableton, it doesn't match the metronome. It doesn't match 120. I don't know if it's me that I'm doing something wrong, or I remember the thing we did together. I struggled like a lot till I had to put all the reference by hand, like manually, because the metronome was completely offset.
I mean, you have to be careful both when you're importing the track in terms of sample rate, though Ableton does convert it usually naturally, but sometimes also you have to be careful about like what modes you're in, you know, because there's a lot of songwriting modes that you have to disenable. Like a perfect example is I had this incredibly creepy thing happen when I was working on the Goldford record where a lot of top line writers are using elastic audio because they like to kind of stretch things. But if you leave elastic audio, it can actually remain embedded in the stem. And what effectively can happen is like what you do will get like snapped to that grid. So I was literally halfway through playing cellos and suddenly all of my cellos changed tempo that I'd done without me doing anything. They snapped to the elastic audio grid. So that actually, if you imported them, you would have imported them at a completely different tempo. So you have to disenable elastic audio. That's one thing. And then I think that, I mean, obviously there's the obvious thing of people not bouncing it on the grid, which is always frustrating. So it may be at 120, it's just like slightly off. One of the things that I beg people to do that really resolves all this, and I highly suggest it if you're sending out tracks, is the hip hop thing of just print the track with an audio click in it. Like send one version of the track from the same 0 with like nothing, and then send one with an audio click. Or alternatively, send a printed audio click, not a computer, don't expect the person to generate a click. Because if it's a rhythmic track, like, I mean, I get really neurotic about this because if the track's really rhythmic, I'm kind of like, listen, if you move it like 3 milliseconds, that's not where I played these parts. You know what I mean? Suddenly I'm behind the beat, and that makes the artist annoyed with me, and I didn't play it like that. So I think it's helped a lot because of the fact that there's a lot of situations that things are being bounced around to a lot of people to share some kind of printed audio click. Similarly, when you send files, send the whatever you tracked to, send that as a file, because you have no idea what's changed in between the time that you got the track and like after you finish playing on it. You have absolutely no idea. Like they may have sent it, they may have added an intro. It's a lot more common that people just want to open a brand new session and comp the strings there and then re-import them into their master file. And there's so many times I've gotten these panicked calls where people are like, everything you did doesn't work. And then I'm like, well, I tracked to what you sent. They're like, but we added a 14-second saxophone intro. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a mess. So like, now you're right. Now nothing lines up. Good on you. So I think that's a good way. And Nacho, my engineer is kind of like an Ableton whiz. So for both of you guys, I'll link you guys in an email with Ashton because he's really strong on Ableton. I'm more like a Pro Tools guy, but I've been using Ableton a lot more. Ableton is money though, I gotta say. I really like the slickness. I think the looping potential piece is like that, and also just like flying stuff around works way better in Ableton than it does in Pro Tools. Pro Tools is pretty clunky that way. So yeah, yes, sir.
One last question. It's about like monitoring. So if you don't have, or if when any of us, we don't have like a monitors,
Yeah.
would you recommend
Oh, you mean just for buying speakers or just using headphones?
headphones?
Yeah, I mean, you can mix on headphones. It's fine, man. I mean, you can mix on headphones for now with the type of stuff that you're doing. I think that like, if you mix on headphones, just don't go too crazy with panning structures with the strings, like moving panning structures. It freaks people out a little bit because it's really easy and seductive to start doing that stuff. So I would just say that.
Okay.
But no, I think it's pretty exciting. I was going to say a few things about the difference between film recording and song arrangement recording. Film recording always has to be done in stereo. And the reason for this is that film is mixed in 5.1 surround. And what that means is if you send mono tracks in film, they cancel each other out. So you effectively get no audio. Because once you put it in a 5.1 system, the waves sort of invert and cancel themselves. So it's very important if you're doing something for film that you use 2 mics and that you do it as a stereo. You can consolidate and send stereo stems, but you can't send mono for film. And so that makes it a bit of a different thing. It does make the layering easier because, of course, now you have 2 mics, you have less phasing, you have more room sound. Sometimes what I'll do for film is I'll have 1 close mic and 1 high room mic, and they seem to like that a lot. Benji, have you been doing much stuff like that? I don't know, like if you've been doing much film and television stuff. I don't know if we've talked about that.
Not really on the film and television, and I'm a fly with the DI, as I like to say, with the electric instrument. So I'm not really messing around too much with miking stuff.
Right. So I think with film and television, that's kind of a big difference. And also, one thing that's come up a lot that's a really subtle thing, but I would sort of bring it up, is that they really prefer to stay away from the range from like G below middle C to about A above middle C in film and television, because it's right where the dialogue is. So I've been learning my lesson lately, how important it is to like sort of spread register in those kinds of cues and do high violins, low cellos, and leave this thing in the middle. I found that before I did that, my music would be turned down more. And that since I left that, somebody gave me that feedback about a year ago, and they're like, we really loved your cues because it stayed completely out of the bandwidth of the dialogue. And I've noticed since I've started been using more instruments like mandolin and cello, like high violin octaves with low cello, that actually my music for film and television has been turned up quite a bit more than it has been in the past, where like they sort of, it starts competing. So that's kind of a small thing that's pretty, that's kind of an interesting little sidebar of it all. So yeah, there you go. Change the world. No, just kidding. But I'd also say, man, that like it's very important, like, to really access the artist as an artist, both before and after the session. No artist that's a pop artist really sees themselves as a pop artist. They just see themselves as an artist. And I think I'm working with, I'm writing right now with Dead Prez. It's, for those of you who don't know, it's a very iconic hip hop group. And they're obsessed with Pink Floyd right now. So they've been making me make all these like Pink Floyd type compositions, which is hilarious. It's been very fun and ridiculous to sort of be David Gilmour on the cello and live that 6-year-old dream of mine. It's like kind of funny. But I've noticed how there's just nothing in that process that ever talks about sales or promotion. I mean, they're very fascinated with sort of politics and psychedelia and sort of ways to do it. So really getting to like the heart of the matter and sort of the core of the song and like really what's being said, and then figuring out how to put that in the work that you do, so that really by the time you're done with what you've done, it should really feel like you've elevated the track. Like, don't leave it until you really feel like you've transformed it in some way. You know, I mean, Ben and I were just doing this kind of bizarre record with a friend of ours in New York live, which was an interesting process about arrangement. You know, he's an artist who isn't a musician in New York, and he has a kind of like a Peter Gabriel sound. And it's important. I think I'm thinking of it because of just the fact that it's so important to let each artist have their process. Like in his case, we'd actually demoed all of the songs in this layered fashion, but he actually did want to do it with an 8-piece string section and spend that money and kind of have that experience. So also, like, don't knee jerk or don't be defensive if the artist needs a different process than you do. Every Norah Jones record that I've done, Chuck, that I arranged for her with, and me, have gone through like 7 or 8 revisions. And then the final chapter is a full day at her house where we go really deep into the song. By the time we're done, it's usually a lot more sparse and a lot more specific than the lushness we made at the beginning. The very first time I worked for Norah Jones, I thought that it was me. I thought that I didn't do a good enough job. Then the second time I realized, no, that's her process that she needs to have to be an artist. And I need to get out of the way and just let that happen. So don't push back in a sense on whatever process that particular artist needs to have. Sort of ask questions and figure it out. Because if you have negative pushback from the artist, whatever you do is going to be cut in the mix. They may say yes today. I promise you, when it gets to the mix, they're going to shoot it down. So anyway. Yeah, so I think that's some good stuff. Any other questions about these processes or any specific artist or way of doing said work?
So this is kind of a situation that's been happening to me in a lot of sessions lately. I'm curious how you like approach this. So like you know, like when I started doing a lot of like remote recording and stuff, especially for bass lines, people would want to hear like a ton of different things with different vibes, and have you just kind of send them like a bunch of stuff. And then sometimes you end up kind of hating the one they pick, and it's like, oh man, you picked that out of everything I sent you. Like, so sometimes I've been getting these situations where it's like, I don't want to do that as crazily as I used to, even though I feel like it's what people want, just because I want to have a little bit more control of what ends up happening. But at the same time, it's like, you know, if the artist likes it, they like it, you know, and so it goes, you know. So it's like I had this one record recently where this producer picked this one take of a bass line that I was just like almost like, for real, like out of all the things I recorded, you picked that one, and like, dang, you know, but so it go, you know, so I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like, how do you go about like making sure you're happy with everything you send, but also like making sure you think you've covered all your bases in terms of what their clients looking for and
Yeah, I
everything.
think it's really cool. When I moved from the space of occasionally playing on important people's records to the space I'm at now, where like most of the recording I'm doing is with known people in various genres, I had to become much more, I had to vet my options I send a lot more deeply. It's kind of, I think about it like takes an actor does in a movie, you know, like, you know, it's interesting. I have a friend who's a Netflix actor. You wouldn't know his name, but you've seen him in a lot of stuff. And he was telling me, he's like, sometimes he'll make sure he fucks up a take that he doesn't want them to use. You know what I mean? Because of exactly what you're talking about. Because you're the only person that can curate your profile as an artist. And actually, what you're talking about, Benji, is incredibly important because of the fact that, like, at the end of the day, like, only you're going to be the person sort of protecting like the future of like what you're heard as, you know. So if you want to be Jamerson or something like on the bass, like, I would just be careful that you're pretty much happy with anything that being used that you send. Also, the setup becomes really important. One of the things I like to do is to first send not my favorite choice. And then I found this works really like magic. Send two things that aren't my first choice, and then send a third thing that is my first choice and pretend it isn't, and be like, and then I did this thing, which I'm not sure, I don't know, it's just like this crazy thing, and then let the artist pick that one. It always works. It really works in advertising to kind of get them sort of set up with some appetizers and then hit them with the thing that really fits about third, and then lock that in. You also have to, this is an important one, you have to pick your battles. In other words, like, don't send stuff you wouldn't be okay with. And then most of the time, be cool. Sometimes you do have to let it go. You have to know the parts of your playing that you want to protect. Like, whatever, I can break it down for you how I think about myself. Sound is number one. Like, the sound of my playing is very important to me. So sometimes I will fight for that if I get like a mix that I can weigh in on, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is not going to help me. Soloing is a big thing for me. Like, I'm very picky about that. That's something I'm very careful about. And sometimes I'll put a lot of time, like I'm doing a lot of work with the Stone Temple Pilots guys right now. And like, sometimes they have me solo, and like, that's the place where I'm really not sending. What I'm generally doing now with your scenario is I'll send my top three, but make it so clear that I did a lot more. I'll be like, hey guys, I spent 6 hours on this, like, and I'll explain, and this helps a lot. I'll give a little sentence about each one. I'll be like, in this one, I did this. In this one, I did this. And in this one, which is my favorite one, I did this. And here's a comp of all three that's my favorite. This is what I would do. Oh, and by the way, I have 11 other takes. So I give them a limited amount of selection, but I give them the feeling that they have a lot of choice. But I also give them stuff that I would be completely happy with. I absolutely do not anymore do things like play all through the song 18 times and send that over. I don't think it's smart, especially with an instrument like bass. Because I think, you know, you could end up with an iconic bass line on a Cardi B song that's like you hate, and that doesn't represent kind of who you are, but you have to live with it. So, I mean, every now and then there is something that we really don't like. And, you know, conversely to what I just said, every now and then you assess your deck of cards. And if you're like, wow, you know, I'm on this record and I'm really the new guy and I have very little say, I need to let it go. But just to give you an idea, when the Louis Capaldi thing fell in my lap, I was like, oh, these strings really, this is going to represent me a lot. This is probably like the biggest thing I'm going to do all year. I have to make absolutely sure that this is extremely beautiful and extremely well done, even if it's going to be a little bit of pushing, you know. You know, like, they pushed me very hard on that record to do the theme of the Netflix show, the How I'm Feeling Now, which I did. They pushed me very hard to play with an ugly 90s out of tune sort of Nirvana unplugged sound. And I said, give me a chance. I'm going to do this fusion. I'm going to do this interesting fusion. Like, check it out. And sometimes you have to talk creatively and fast talk. Because I was like, I'm not going to play like out of tune cello on this song. Like, the song ended up being huge. Like, I'm not going to have like, oh, it's just him and like me playing piano and me playing cello, and like I'm out of tune for the whole verse. Like, nah, that doesn't work for me, you know, unless there's like a lot of money to be playing out of tune, or it's a cool microtonal song that it's awesome. You know, that could work too. But yeah, no, I think it's cool. I think that you know, the biggest takeaways I'd have from this is that like, you know, get involved, because for each one of you, I think it's really important for you to, you know, create a way to do this so that, because the worst thing is for something really big to come in and not really have a system, if that makes sense. So, you know, I think that it's really good, anything, making your own songs, everything, like the way that you can have a way to do this that, you know, works, becomes important, however it works for you, which can be a lot of different ways, you know. So yeah, that's good stuff. I got to figure out a good song to send you all. That'll be pretty cool. And Courtney, I know as you were saying, you haven't done it much, but I mean, it's really good to kind of even just start with friends of yours you're playing with, or even your own songs, you know, and kind of sometimes give yourself like little exercises you can do. Even if you're just kind of like, okay, I'm going to make a 16-bar intro that sounds like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I'm going to like make this Randy Newman kind of thing. Like, it helped me a lot when I was starting out to do these little exercises like that. I had to do a whole project for Citizen Cope that was Randy Newman remakes. And that was really helpful to really kind of figure out like what makes Randy Newman sound like Randy Newman, like the very sort of concentrated sound aspect, this sort of folkloric Americana thing, like a little bit of Dvorak, you know, pretty cool. So I like that. And then the complicated piece of writing for a whole orchestra. This I want to talk about for a second, because when I started the Foreigner Symphonic Project, it was very strange because they booked me to do it based on Frank Ocean's record, which I did myself as a layered thing. But with Foreigner, we wrote for 150 people. And one of the things I learned, because all of you guys are very creative string players, is that when you're writing for other people, you actually have to compose more, because you can't count on them to bring emotionality like you will as a player, if that makes sense. Like, there were so many parts that I was so disappointed in because I wouldn't have played them that way. But then I realized, like, well, I can't ask these people to play it that way. They're not going to give it that expression. So it's just something to consider when you're writing for other people. There may be actually more compositional technique involved because of the fact that they're just not the same kind of players that are going to imbue it with a lot of passion. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pick a song and send it to you guys. I'm going to send a brief about it. And as I said, I really don't want you all to stress. Do the best you can do. If all you can do is do it in GarageBand, I'm more interested in like your ideas and your approach than I don't care about the technology piece so much. For those of you like Nacho that are a bit more advanced with this, like, I'm going to look at your files and I'm going to like give you some commentary. But like Courtney, if you haven't done this much, do it the best you can. I'm going to be much more interested in your ideas than I'm going to be in like the execution, because you can always find a friend to record with, like just like I've done here in Holland. But I'm going to send the song. I'm going to send the brief. The brief on the song is going to be intentionally confusing, because I'm going to confuse you, because that's exactly what people do to me. And what I'm going to ask is that you all send it back a couple of days. I'll send an email around whether we're going to try to do this next Friday, or let's not do it Wednesday, because I really want the two of you in it. But I'll send an email about schedule and we'll figure out a time we can do it, hopefully next Friday or whatever works for everybody here. But I do want y'all to send it to me so I can I'm going to kind of go around the room and I'm going to kind of push back the way they push back on me, because a lot of this also is when you're dealing with the clients and the producers, like sort of how you handle like pushback, how you handle kind of like revisions, like when you can say, I always see these knee-jerk things. I was doing a track yesterday and the artist hit me up today and she doesn't even understand how complicated what she's asking for is, because she's not a string player. And she's like, I want this more octaves higher and this and that, and the budget's really small. And my first reaction was to knee-jerk and be like, no, we can't do that within this budget. And then I was like, Dave, she's no idea. All you have to do is basically do 4 more tracks of high fake harmonic tremolo and she'll be thrilled. Just do it. You know what I mean? Like, you know, so there's a lot to that. So we'll have some fun doing that. And I'll pick something cool. And we're going to do a song this week, and then we're going to do a movie cue next time. Between session 2 and session 3, we're going to do a movie cue. So we'll do kind of one of each. The movie cue you're actually going to write. So this is going to be an arrangement one, and the second one is just going to be a scene from a movie, and you're going to have to score it. So that's going to be our homework. I love all of you, and it's great to see everybody. You're some awesome humans that are in my life, so thank you for that. All right. And the two people about Ableton things, I'm going to put you guys in an email with my engineer so we can kind of like get a little more deep with Ableton stuff. Cool. Awesome.